She is very nervous, so please give her your attention.
Yeah.
So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Vicky and I'm the Director of Studies at the World Peace Academy. And I have the pleasure this evening of listening to Dr. Jan Oberg, who is going to talk to us on the subject of why don't we make peace when we easily could. So Jan has been lecturing at WPA since the Academy was established 3 years ago. He holds a PhD in sociology and is a researcher in the field of peace and future studies. So Jan's asked me to keep the introduction short, and I'd ask you to look at the WPA website if you'd like to get a clearer idea of his very impressive academic record, including publications and membership of various committees and advisory boards that have been promoting peace and conflict resolution. But one of the things that I'd like to mention is that Jan and his wife Christina started the Transnational Foundation for Peace and Future Research, TFF, over 25 years ago in Lund, Sweden. And TFF is an independent think tank, a global network that promotes conflict mitigation and reconciliation through on-the-ground research, active listening, education and advocacy. And Jan himself has made over 70 visits, fact-finding missions to former Yugoslavia. He also visited Iraq twice before the US-led invasion, and he's been active with youth in Burundi. So it's clear that Jan is able to bridge the divide between academic work and on-the-ground practical field experience. Equally important, I think, to mention is the fact that Jan is a professional photographer. And in fact, downstairs in the foyer of the World Peace Academy are a number of his photos, and I'm sure that he'll be happy to explain his motivations behind these photos with you. If you're
And to sell also.
Yeah.
So I welcome Jan Oberg this evening.
Thank you. We're given this little somewhat provocative title, why don't we make peace when it would be so easy? Of course it's not that easy to make peace in this world. It's probably easier to think of what peace is and have some ideas or visions or utopias about it than it is to practice and implement it, because there are formidable forces that do not at least want the type of peace we are thinking of in this academy. And what I can try to do in the short time we have here, because I really want this to also lead to discussions and good ideas, the brainstorm after my lecture, what can be done. I believe that peace research should do good diagnosis, solid analysis of what the problems are, and then it should do prognosis. What will happen if we do this? What will happen if we don't do anything? What will happen if we do something else? And then together with those who have the problem, or are in trouble, for instance, those who are in a war zone, governments or liberation movements or nonviolent demonstrators or whatever it is, discuss dialogue about how to find solutions. Where one criteria is, and must always been the same as doctors would have, never use more violence than is absolutely necessary to achieve healing and conflict resolution. There might be cases where this is necessary. But a doctor cannot legitimately spill more blood or cause more pain on a patient than is absolutely necessary for the healing. And the awful thing is that the international community we have practice a lot of unnecessary suffering on people. And usually, and that's the worst thing, do not solve the problems. Do not dialogue with those who have the problem, but snatch the conflict out of their hands and say, we know what's best for you. Such a place as Bosnia or Kosovo, which are total failures as conflict resolution projects. I should add that I have been to these places that I speak about, with few exceptions. I have not been to Libya, but I do not mind speaking about not the Libyan society internally, because I have not been there. But I would be happy to speak about and also refer to what the international community, so-called, meaning NATO, did in the Libyan case in order to create what they believe is democracy, human rights, women's liberation, and peace. So I think one can talk about invasions and interventions and ways of bombing and things like that without having been to the place. But you cannot talk about internal structures and solutions without having been to a place. Like a doctor should not speak about a patient he's never seen. So my reference points will be rather much what I have experienced myself. And of course, sitting here talking tonight about what we should learn and should do better, one case that is in front of us, of course, is Syria, and the other case that is in front of us is Iran. I have been to Syria, not to do studies, but I passed through it on the way to Iraq. And next month I will go to Iran to do some fact-finding and talk with Iranians, how they see the conflict they're in with certain countries. I wish more scholars would do the same. I think that's where we really learn how difficult, how complex everything is. So this having said as an introduction, let me also add that what concerns me is the lack of institutional learning in the international forums or organizations. I would say stemming back to one of the most fundamental, most impact-rich conflicts that we've had since '45, namely that in former Yugoslavia. Former Yugoslavia is, to me, a conflict formation, a big, complex thing, which is one of the most complex anywhere on earth, and where what we did, and I say we, I mean external factors, have not been successful. And I take therefore the point of departure in 1999 when NATO decided to bomb Serbia and Kosovo to achieve an independent Kosovo, and could go on to other places such as Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, and then Libya, and God forbid, Syria, Iran. Now, anybody who works with helping, trying to help others with their conflict should have a minimum of respect for the complexities and for the views of those who have or own the conflict. And I don't think we always see that in the Western world's embassies. There is very much a talking down to those who have a conflict, such as the people in Yugoslavia, many of whom were considered primitive compared with the rest of Europe, were actually set that way. They had atavistic conflicts with each other. That they had no civil society. They didn't have the modernity that we have in the West. And so this leads to a kind of, I wouldn't use the strong word racism, but it leads to a cultural insensitivity vis-a-vis those we think we can intervene in. At the same time that if we have problems in the West or in the NATO countries, the EU structure, the United States, we would never accept that people from another culture with another background came in and with or without violence told us what we should do and what our society should look like and how we should solve our problems. I think an Iranian group coming to the European Union with ideas about how we should solve the present financial crisis in the European Union would probably not be received by anyone in Europe. And you can go on like that. So point one in a diagnosis, of course, is, I should perhaps use this one because I need to fill out a few things. Where do we have this one? There it is. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Phil. Oops. Tabula rasa. This is not a good yellow one, I think. Why didn't you tell me that that should not be used? Oh, it's a yellow one. Sorry about that. Red is not a good color. I think we need to do black. A conflict is a problem to be solved. And therefore, if you do diagnosis, your results should not be to decide who to blame or who to punish. You shouldn't look only at parties, you should look at what stands between the parties. What is the issue? when you begin to understand what the issue is, you find out normally, that's my experience from a few conflict areas, you find out that basically all parties have reasonably good arguments, but you do not necessarily support the means they use to bring that argument forward. But a lot of people, when you listen to Serbs or Croats or Bosnian Muslims or Bosnian Croats, or you listen to Slovenes or Macedonians and Albanians, you will find out that they all have very good reasons to be either angry or fearful or whatever. That means it's getting complex. What the West tends to do is to divide all conflicts into two parties and define one as good and the others as bad. This has nothing to do with professional conflict understanding and analysis. It's purely political work serving a later purpose of bombing or punishment. So whenever you see media reports from complex conflicts, you hear politicians say that they know who is the bad guy in the conflict. I can safely tell you they are on the wrong track. And we have, and that's the conclusion on that point, we have to deal also with those we think are bad guys. We have particularly to talk with those we think are bad guys in a conflict. So first of all is a minimum of respect. Secondly, can you read this?
Yeah.
It's not good. Find a black one which is more black. I'm sorry to argue that we shouldn't see conflicts as black and white, and then I use black on a whiteboard. The other one is it's complex. Respect not only the parties but also the complexity, and define the conflict broadly. There are never two parties to a conflict. It's much more complicated than that anywhere. Third, look into the history of the place and the surroundings of the place, and particularly be aware of, put your emphasis on where historically did the Western world do something in history at that country. Last time I was here I spoke about Libya, and that was in 2011. And that was exactly what it was about at the time, that in 1911 we split Libya in among the same three parts that it has today. Now it's nice to know a little bit of history. I don't believe that we can solve problems by knowing history, but knowing history helps us solve problems. We can find many other arguments for doing a diagnosis. We can use the attitude, conflict and behavior triangle that Johan Galtung has developed, and plus others. I used to say there are more to it than that, but that is a kind of qualified analytical tool. Ask people how they think, how they feel about the conflict, about themselves and about the opponent. Ask them and try to, without imposing your own interpretations, ask them what they think it's about. Some say it's about history, some say it's about constitution, some say it's about traumas, some say it's about money, some say it's about land, some say it's about something that happened yesterday. Wealth and complexity in any conflict when you start interviewing people. Whatever we do in diagnosis, it serves one big purpose, namely to help us do something relevant, adequate, and non-harming, or as little harming as possible later on in the process. What the international community does today, and I say international community, I mean the West, because there is no international community worldwide. It is not international, it's transnational or global or whatever we call it, and there's no community feeling. So it's a word, international community is a word from the international press, and by politicians who themselves say, we are representing the international community. It's usually 5 prime ministers or something like that, who think that they have a right to do that, or the arrogant power is the 5 permanent powers of the Security Council. But let that rest here. Those who think of intervention, which is normal in NATO countries, one combination or another. If we do not do the diagnosis well, we're going to do the prognosis wrong, we're going to do the treatment, the conflict resolution, the way we decide to act with or against the parties, that will go wrong too. It is exactly the same again as with medicine. Without a good diagnosis, you're going to cut off the wrong leg of the patient. You operate his heart when his liver is the problem. It sounds banal, and I'm sorry to say much of what we have to say about the reforms of the international community is banal, because it's utterly primitive. It's very sophisticated when it comes to the military. It's very sophisticated when it comes to economic mechanism and financial policies. It is very primitive when it comes to conflict analysis. Third, fifth, whatever down the line here, you should only use professionally trained experts. I'm of the opinion that peace is a subject that deserves professionalism. If you're a good lawyer, it doesn't mean that you know anything about how to analyze a conflict. You can be a brilliant diplomat. You don't know anything about, have not got the kind of sense, at least, of what we're doing, for instance, in this place. You're bound to do things worse. There are examples, wonderful examples of individuals who can do it without education. Like there are great artists who never went to an art academy. There are great peacemakers who never went to a peace academy. But the chances increases that you will have better results if people have some education. And as I always say, I think most of us would like to have surgery on our body performed by somebody who has an education in medicine than somebody who doesn't have it. So professionals should be developed. And I always point to the European Union because it's relevant for most of us sitting here, although Switzerland is not that relevant, or whatever we call it. But the European Union consists of 500 million people and has as its highest purpose to create peace. Peace, to keep peace inside the European Union and to create peace outside the Union. Now, that union does not have a single peace academy. It does not have a single person, as far as I know, in its bureaucracy, in its commission, etc., who are professionally trained in understanding conflicts, peace, reconciliation, forgiveness, and those sorts of things. They have definitely no educated people when it comes to nonviolent conflict resolution. If you know some, send me the names, emails, or telephone numbers. I would love to be in contact with them. Secondly, I think we should have, in any country in the world, a peace academy or peace education or whatever you call it. I'm not saying that just because we're educated we can do better things. I'm saying that increases the chance. We also know that highly educated people can do awful things because they're smart and well-educated and intelligent enough to make a genocide very effective, for instance. Education does not always serve a good purpose. But not to have educated people in this field makes you make the wrong assumptions about what your actions will lead to. The classical thing now with the conflict since the bombing of Yugoslavia up till the latest bombings have been that all assumptions that governments did were wrong. There's not a single main assumptions in the case of Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, Libya, Afghanistan, if I didn't mention it, that have turned out to be right. They have all been either wrong time perspectives, underestimations of the complexity of the place, a total failure in responding, in judging what response the people would have when they see the Western coalition moving in, such as there will be people standing with flowers along the roads to Baghdad when they roll in. Now, you know, I had not been 24 hours to Baghdad before I knew that that would not be a single person standing there. So there are, of course, no weapons of mass destruction, and you can go on like that. All the major assumptions, which you would expect to be correct because they spend millions and millions of krona, dollars, francs, or whatever it is on their intelligence services and some research institute and some advisors. You would expect them to have a reasonably good prediction capacity. Fact is, they don't. Not to boast of what we've done in the Transnational Foundation, we make much more precise predictions of what would happen if they intervened than they themselves have done. My book about Iraq in Danish, because Denmark was a major occupying power and because I'm a Danish citizen, was called Predictable Fiasco. It was not published, you know, recently. It was published in 2004 based on my writings in 2003 when the invasion took place. I'm not one of those who think we should afterwards say that we were right. We should be giving and risking making predictions and see who made the best predictions. Now, certainly the Danish government did not make good predictions about the Iraq. So I cannot stress enough, emphasize enough the need for professionals in the field of peace. I'm sick and tired of amateurs whose actions, assumptions, and policies lead to utter destruction, death, and chaos for innocent citizens, men, women, and children in these conflict places. I insist that it is immoral, unacceptable for civilized countries, if that's what we think we are, to mass murder people when there's no reason, just because you make the wrong assumptions. I'm here a nice guy because I'm assuming they wanted to create peace with what they did. I'm not talking about it as if they actually wanted the war or sitting and controlling the order and things like that. I'm taking for granted now, for a moment at least, that many of these countries did intervene in these places with a good heart and noble motive of trying to help people stop wars. It was utter failure everywhere that I have been. So let's have peace education, conflict analysis education everywhere we go. And the third point here is, last point on the diagnosis is, media must change. Media must change. Media today are not, by media I mean mainstream media, particularly radio, television, and newspapers, are not objectively describing what the conflict is about. It is falling down in the trap immediately of making black and white images. They're falling down in the trap of monitoring violence more than the conflict that underlies the violence. So if we say it would be easy to change, it is to give a number of editors and journalists a training not in war reporting and violence reporting, but also in conflict reporting. And some would call it peace journalism. I'm not happy with that term because I don't think also that journalists should contribute to a particular value. They should do their best to be objective, research-based. They should go to the place and they should analyze the underlying conflict rather than participating in the blame game. At the moment, the whole Western press is totally sure that everything is the fault of Assad in Syria. I am not. At the time, they were all assured that Slobodan Milosevic was the problem in former Yugoslavia. I know he was not. He was a problem, he was not the only. At the time, they said if only, and they participated in the political game, if only Saddam Hussein goes, everything will be fine. It is this, if I may use a strong word, stupid assumption that conflicts have to do with individuals more than with structures and underlying economic, political, constitutional power structures. It's naive to believe that one person changed at the top will solve the problems. But that's again because of certain Western bias. We look at individuals. We haven't understood that conflicts happens between individuals and not inside individuals. And that it is a problem and not a matter of evil people. Predominantly. I'm not saying there are no evil people on earth, but it's not how we solve the problem. And killing whoever we think might be evil is quite a project. As you probably know, President Obama has every Tuesday afternoon, he has a list on his table which is called the kill list. And he personally signs off which individuals in some terrorist organization somewhere in Yemen or wherever it is shall be killed this week. I do not think actually that that belongs to a democracy. I'm not sure I want to be allied with a country whose president thinks that that is what they should do. However, I respect him for saying, I am taking the moral responsibility because all his predecessors have said, just go and kill them, I don't want to know who it is. But Obama has this kind of moral thing, I want to check them, put my name on each one of those. If you think this is propaganda, it was published in the New York Times, a huge article and analysis done by excellent journalists. So, the media misinformation, and if you think I'm overdoing it, I can give you tons of examples where media have told you stories that were not, turned out later not to be true, or were more complex. Just give them that quickly, to the Yuhula massacre in Syria. Everybody in the West said this is the work of Assad and the informal security loose guys. I'm forgetting Shiva. Where is our guy from Syria? Shihab. It turned out that the United Nations 1 month to 6 weeks later made an analysis in which they say, to put it crudely, we cannot say who did it. There's certainly signs that it was done by government troops. There's certainly signs also that it was done by the armed opposition, the armed people who call themselves parts of the new national army, who are fed by the West in destabilizing the country. But the UN says, having made the only such solid analysis, that we cannot say. Now that report was not reported in the Western media afterwards. Worth the mention, the morning that everything of the Hula massacre done by Assad was the work of Assad. And I don't think it was. Because 2 days later, Kofi Annan was supposed to arrive in Damascus and talk with Assad. I mean, if you expect Assad to be a total idiot, he would do a massacre right before Kofi Annan comes, but I don't think he's a total idiot. The same applies to the bread queue massacre in Sarajevo during the war, the Markala Square massacre in Sarajevo, and the massacre in, I'm forgetting the little village now in Kosovo, which led to legitimation, used as legitimation for bombing Yugoslavia in 1990. Media must simply be helped to become conflict monitors, conflict understanding. We need media who can tell us, as well as they can tell us sports journalism or economic journalism or food, what is going on, but not by pointing to individuals, but pointing to conflicts, problems, and complexities. It's the damn duty of media to be publicly enlightening and not run political games, not write editorials to say, you've got to act, you've got to bomb, you've got to do this and that. It is not the task of media to push interventionism. Debate articles, yes, but not editorials. And these editorials come up everywhere in the mainstream Western press. Go and do something. And when they've been saying it sufficiently long time, politicians dare not say, no, we're not going to do it. They say, yes, we must do it. I would say there are media-instigated, media-promoted wars that are going on. If they could keep quiet for a while and not create opinions like that, there would be a hope not to have so many interventions also in the future. Another example, the highest leader of Iran has long ago said, and BBC is the only one who has reported it among the main Western press, that nuclear weapons will never be acquired by Iran because, according to the Quran, it's haram. Haram meaning the absolutely forbidden, that must never happen, the space you do not enter. Now it would be nice, instead of always hearing that Iranians cannot be trusted and they're doing bad things in their laboratories and they are a threat to the whole world and all that. It would be nice also to have a balanced view. I'm not saying they're not doing that. I'm saying a balanced view. That they are also having religious, philosophical motives for not acquiring nuclear weapons. And therefore we should be careful not to give them arguments for acquiring nuclear weapons by threatening them with total destruction. If you threaten somebody with total destruction, they might look around and say, how are we going to defend ourselves? Nuclear weapons might be a good idea. So then comes prognosis. That's where we actually basically have a brainstorm. Now brainstorm is not known as a technology in ministries of foreign affairs or prime minister's offices, of course. But we could help them anyhow. We could also be called upon to give ideas. That has almost never happened. Give you an example, I was recently asked to be a keynote speaker by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Denmark. First time in 20 years they're asking me to come to Denmark and say anything, which I gladly did, and I said, what is the honorarium for doing that? Oh, we don't pay honorariums. And then I said, do you pay those who repair your photocopying machines? Oh yes, we do. Okay, I said, if you pay for travels, hotels, for the participants, and for photocopying machine repair people, and for your staff, but the only thing you don't pay is intellectual input. It might be harmful to your policy making. Now, I got no answer to that diplomatic statement. So a brainstorm would be to ask a number of reasonably creative questions. What if? Now we know what the problem is. Now comes the what if. What if I'm talking about the period before the war. That's what prognosis should be done. What if we invited all the parties to come to the European Parliament and explain to us what their problems with each other are? What if we decided to invite them and make the General Assembly in New York a hearing hall, in which the parties from a conflict region plus some others, if necessary, could come and be interviewed, be having a hearing model where journalists, experts, and others could ask everybody from Syria or Libya or Kosovo or whatever, what is the problem? What is your problem? What is it you would like the international community to do, and what? Let's hear from you. Let's give those who have the conflict a voice. The whole international system now builds on the idea that we can go and do that without talking with these people. The most useful things I've done in my life was to go to talk with people in conflict regions. Not sitting making assumptions in a capital thousands of kilometers away. They don't know a goddamn thing. Or they've had a briefing from an intelligence service that usually misses everything important that happens in the world. Sorry to say so, these guys should be kicked. Whole security system, intelligence system didn't predict even the fall of the Soviet Union. Nobody predicted the Arab Spring. Excuse me, why are we paying these over our taxpayers? Because everything happens in the world and they're taken aback, taken by surprise. They're not doing a good job. They're lousy professionals. Sorry to say, I mean, it sounds arrogant. But if one more important event in the human modern history happens, and no intelligence service, no governments are prepared for it, I never heard that it could happen. Not even with a 1% chance. That something is wrong in this kind of early warning gathering kind of intelligence service. What are these guys doing? Sitting in the bar somewhere in a Hilton hotel and think they know the reality of it? It's a little bit embarrassing for some people that they missed whatever happened in the world. Again and again. And I tell you, they'll miss what happens tomorrow also. So what if we decided to send a Nobel Peace Prize committee, 20 people, 15 people, 10 people, and talk with all sides on the spot? Travel around from village to village, place to place, government to government, and discuss exactly as Mr. Kofi Annan does, a man who I commands my greatest respect. What if we decided that if there's somebody like Kofi Annan, there are 3,000 others like Kofi Annan who can be sent to different places in time, together with well-educated, conflict analytical people, conflict teams, conflict mitigators and mediators, and report to us, not as intelligence services, but as human beings with an expertise, what is going on, what is dangerous, what are the signs that this may break up in a total war, who says what to whom, who is really feeling that they have their backs against the wall, how is it expressed, how much hatred is found among the parties, who are conflicts to the party. Sorry, who are parties to the conflict. If you think Kosovo was about Serbs and Albanians, give me a break. It was about China. It was about oil and gas. It was about transport corridor number 8 and getting oil out from Central Asia through Macedonia to the Vlora harbor of Albania. If you think Syria is about Syria and not about Iran, if you think the whole thing of Iraq was about Iraq, it was about how to prevent China and others from getting access to the oil in Iraq also. I'm not saying it was not about what we heard, but it was about 3,000 other things. There is a distinction to be made between the conflict spot or the stage and the whole conflict theater. It's much, much, much broader. What goes on in Syria now has to do deeply, deeply with its closest ally, namely Iran. So what if we decided as individuals and citizens to say, yes, we can do something. And we began to use Facebook and other media communities to communicate directly with the bad guys with those who support the government and with the opposition and with the non-armed opposition, and we gave them support and we traveled down there, and those of us who run these organizations could get some little finance to go down and do seminars and talks with people. I'm proud to have a tiny, tiny organization that is all volunteer that has been involved time and again in mediation in local communities in former Yugoslavia. Now, not many places we've not done it with various parties. Training courses with media people, training courses with young people, training courses with politicians in how to understand their own conflicts and see ways out of it. Poor money, set up foundations, funds where educated citizens, scholars and others can go to these and supplement the collection of knowledge that governments are supposed to do because they are not doing it well enough. Citizens diplomats, citizens mediators, citizens thinkers, citizens cultural knowers, citizens who know about reconciliation, forgiveness, citizen psychologists and others, child psychologists, people who can talk with all kinds of different people in conflict regions before it blows up. And there is no excuse. It is possible to go to these places at least before they blow up. I'm the living proof that you can go to almost any place if you want to. But you have to take a little risk also. But peace is worth taking a risk for. What if we said all the things we've done so far and tried and seen do not work, we will not do again? And my favorite hate object here is sanctions. Get this sanctions idea out of international politics. It kills millions of people. I cannot make this point strong enough. My perception of all this changed, and you may say, what an emotional idiot. When I went to the child hospitals in Baghdad and Basra. And please don't say this was Saddam Hussein propaganda. These kids who were sick mothers had them on their arms. These kids had leukemia because their parents had gotten leukemia after the bombing with depleted uranium in the Gulf War. Now these sanctions were so cruel, and Hans von Sponeck, who is attached to this institution, may have talked about it, but he is the living evidence of what it is with his enormously knowledgeable book about it because he was as the UN's highest humanitarian coordinator. These sanctions imply that as far as I know, I'm not a doctor, you need 3 different types of medicines to heal leukemia. Let's call them A, B, and C. The sanctions committee, which sat in New York, decided in such a sophisticated manner that the 3 medicines would not be available in Iraq at the same time. If you had A and B, you would not have C. If you had C and A, you would not be allowed to import B. One single purpose, to kill as many as you can. And that has cost 1 million Iraqis their lives. Saddam never killed 1 million people. 13 years of sanctions have killed more people than 8 years of occupation and warfare. As far as we know from the available statistics, history shows that. What are we doing now? We're putting up a 5th year of sanctions against Iran. Iran is 3 times bigger in terms of human beings than Iraq. Now imagine the following. We are having sanctions put down on the Iranian 75 million people, and they last for 10 years. The only thing the West knows is how to tighten them, increase them, make them stronger, strangulate the civil society more and more. What are the effects of it? The effects are well known from Serbia, from everywhere else in modern times that these sanctions have been used. The results are the following. People die. Prices go up. The price of bread and rice is already 300% of what it was a couple of months ago in Iran. People are thrown out of their jobs. People can no longer find jobs. Young Iranian students who study in Lund, Sweden, where I live, can no longer get money transferred to them from their parents because there cannot be economic transactions between an Iranian bank and a Swedish bank. If they happen to have cash in Sweden, they cannot put it into the legitimate bank account they have because they are Iranians. And to stay in Sweden, you have, according to the migration officers, to have a bank account with money on it to be allowed to stay. If you don't have funds, you will be thrown out. So my wife and I are now supporting a young Iranian who helps us paint our windows. He's paid for it to help him stay in Sweden because his fate will be to go home to 2.5 years military service if he can't stay. This is how it hits totally innocent people. The West doesn't bother about it. The West, which is so interested in humanitarian intervention in saving lives, doesn't bother a damn thing about these kinds of things. Such a local story would not even be possible to sell to the local media. Here is one example in Sweden of the consequences of what Sweden participates in and on Iran. Next, the opposition that exists in these countries that are objects of sanctions will support their government more than support those who put up those sanctions and make their lives hell. I know this from Serbia. Next, sanctions create a criminal mafia elite who thrives on anyhow getting certain commodities in over the border from other countries and sell them at the black market. All these countries which have been object of economic sanctions are now suffering from elites who belong to the mafia. Again, Belgrade is a very good example. Some of the prime ministers and others have been killed because of these guys and these games. Most important, perhaps, if we look at it from an egoistic Western point of view, nobody in Iran are likely to do what we tell them to do and to obey our ideas and come our way if we treat them that way. You take a culture with 5,000 to 7,000 years of history. You take countries which are cradles of our own Western civilization and you treat them like shit. And you kill their children and you play your games for something they are not known to have done. Iran does not have nuclear weapons. Israel has it. Others have it. We're doing these things on a country that has not done anything wrong, but preemptively because we think that they might do something wrong. Now, treat people that way and they will do the wrong thing. You create your own enemies. Don't tell me that Iran is an enemy of the West. Or that Serbians worry. Or that the Iraqis worry. Where did the Iraqi middle class, when it existed, there is no middle class anymore in that society, where did they send their young boys for education? Where did they buy property? Who were they inspired by? Which music did they listen to? The West. Same in Iran. Although all the bad things the US and others have done historically to Iran, they don't hate the West. You can open any book about people who travel in Iran, they'll tell you there's an amazing friendliness vis-a-vis Westerners at the individual level, but not vis-a-vis governments. And by the way, in parentheses, let me kind of reiterate what I think people should know about Iran. CIA and the British, that what is today called MI6, instigated the coup d'etat in 1953 against Mossadegh, the democratically elected prime minister of Iraq, and installed the Shah family, which of course turned out to be a kind of disaster for Iran. There was also the airplane crash caused by, I think it was in '82, caused by a stray missile from a naval vessel of the United States that killed about 200 passengers on board an Iranian plane. Now the sanctions. Now saying that they are a threat to the whole world. Now saying this and that. Totally unfounded. Are you aware that the military expenditures of Iran is 1% of that of the United States? 1% of that of the United States. Do you think these guys are idiots? With 1% of the US, that means less than, probably 0.5% of the NATO forces, plus add to that Israel's force. Do you think these guys are totally idiots that they would start a war? That they would start it. They might respond to if we attack, but do you think they would start a war? A country whose history is that it has not invaded anybody the last 200 years. That's a pretty good record compared with the United States and Britain and others. You know, these images have to change a little bit by enlightened education, educating the people of our countries. We're deeply ignorant, we're conflict illiterates. And media are missing one of their greatest tasks to enlighten us. What country is Iraq? What country was Iraq? What country is Iran? What country was Libya? Libya was not only a bad country. There were more hospital beds in Libya than there is in Denmark. As one indicator. The richest country in the African continent. So Gaddafi definitely accumulated a lot of wealth, but he didn't only do that. So what if is a good question. What if we learn something from our failures before? Unfortunately, very few people in politics learn anything because they think in 4-year terms. And I don't think the experience, if it ever got into his mind, of George W. Bush in Iraq is transferred to the new leadership. Unfortunately, there's no what we call institutional learning. There's lesson learned in the United Nations and other places, but not this. So unfortunately, we're bound to see mistakes of that time, such as sanctions, such as bombing and interventions keep on, until we have an enlightened public that says no. And does not only say no, but say yes to other mechanisms of conflict resolution. So prognosis lead to what if on a lot of what if culturally, economically, politically we did different things. What about just taking out some leaders from a conflict area and put them in a hotel in the mountains without media attention and sit with them for weeks and discuss in depth what could be done about their conflict? Most people who are in conflicts are willing to talk if treated with respect, equality, and by professionals. But they're not willing to talk if they are told that they are bad guys, war criminals, and should be killed or thrown out of their jobs. They're not willing to come to your tables of facilitation meetings. But if we were a little bit smarter and really wanted, then we could get these people out to places without media attention, without losing face risks, and find solutions. I think actually that's probably what the entourage of Kofi Annan is doing. Now then we need the whole machinery when there is a kind of peace deal, peace orientation. One of the things that really has disappointed me is that when Kofi Annan made his six-point plan, which is a formidable intellectual victory for decency, for justice, for classical, competent, professional mediation, what is the international community of 193 countries able to do? They say, oh, unfortunately, we have only 35 monitors to send to Syria right now. 193 UN members can only altogether find 35 people to send to a huge country called Syria. I mean, you cannot monitor what happens in Basel with 35 people. That's true. There should have been, within 48 hours, 3,000 down on the ground. And later on, maybe increased to 5,000 or 10,000 people, unarmed or whatever, but monitors who could be at places, help the civilians, maybe facilitate small meetings in the villages, etc., etc. Get people together, understand the issue, being well prepared intellectually for the mediation task, and speaking Arabic. But we can only find 35. Now that is to undermine civilian conflict resolution attempts and professional mediation of Kofi Annan, who is one of the best in the present world. If his decision had been, or his commission had worked out that now this place must be bombed, that would have happened within 48 hours.
That's true.
But all the people, the police, the civilians, the mediators, the armies of people who we needed to send in to calm down and do something before it really blows up, that cannot be delivered by all these countries, among other things because we don't have academies like this beautiful place. So I'm asking, why don't we do it when it would be so easy and so much cheaper than investing in military and weapon systems and weapon research? Why is it we are nuts when it comes to understanding conflicts, but we're brilliant at playing with long-range missiles and bombing airplanes? Why is it we can have nuclear weapons, but we can't find peace? There's something deeply wrong somewhere, friends. And education is a main way to get over that and into a better situation. So we need an international community, finally, when we talk about solutions. Solutions would go, in my thinking, in the direction of, first of all, professional conflict handling. Secondly, better media who focuses on the conflict, not on the violence, who focus not on the parties, but on the history and the culture. It will go through a massive armament of civilians to be sent to places when in need before things fall apart. It would mean a much more efficient early warning system than we have today, or if it is good enough, that there is early listening and early action. We know that the international community's various organizations, the UN in particular, is starved for funds. They do not have the resources to take on also those places which have not blown up yet, but that's what they should be able to do, preventive, violence preventive work. So the UN is, to me, still a main actor. And I know this is very controversial to say, but there's the international community, there is monitors, civilians of all kinds, armies, or people who understand things, are able to talk with people and do not have biases. Who is the good guys and bad guys? It's totally irrelevant if you want to solve a problem. It's totally irrelevant whether a patient has been smoking or not and caused his own cancer. You have to repair on him. It doesn't help him to say, you're a stupid guy, you smoke too much, now you have cancer, goodbye. You operate on the person, you help the person, no matter that he's caused his own disease. That's what we have to do in Syria and Libya and all the other places too. Solutions would be that we train our people in understanding nonviolence. Why? Not because we're Gandhians, all of us, but because that is what the UN Charter says. Article 1. Peace shall be established by peaceful means. Excuse me. This is a Gandhian document. The UN is based on Gandhian thinking. Peace shall be established by peaceful means. Peace by peaceful means. Only when everything has been tried, such as facilitation, mediation, negotiations, consultations, meetings, groups, pressure, politics, whatever, and they also mention sanctions, unfortunately, but that's what they did in 1945, so forgive them. At that time, they didn't know what sanctions do. we have no reason to keep on those sanctions. Then military, if necessary, can be employed. Under the command of the UN, not under the command of NATO. So nonviolence is what you shouldn't let anybody go out and do peace mediation in a conflict area if they're not trained in nonviolent understanding. And only when you're trained in that do you know when it is relevant to use military or violent means. If you don't know anything about nonviolence, you also don't know when military is necessary. Now, I'm turning it upside down because most people say, okay, if the military doesn't work, then we can perhaps supplement it with some nonviolent thinking. What is it that has changed the world to the better? Is nonviolent fighting against the Marcos regime in the Philippines, against the Shah of Iran in Iran, against the Bolshevik leaders of Eastern Germany at the time, with the Lech Walesa and the people in Gdansk. It's the Velvet Revolution in then Czechoslovakia and under Václav Havel, who later on became, after he got the Nobel Peace Prize, he got became a war advocate, and then he died. All the obituaries about him said what a peaceful guy he was. Unfortunately, he was supporting all the American wars, but that's parentheses. We see the nonviolence worked in Serbia. We see how it worked to a certain extent in Ukraine. We see how it has worked in Tunisia. Lots of the change in Egypt has taken place this way. All these cases have never been predicted by any intelligence service and has not been liked by any government and not been built on by this government. What did the international community do when it came to Kosovo? The first thing it was to build down all the structures that Dr. Rugova and his nonviolent resistance in Kosovo had set up to train people schools and garages and all that, and alternative parallel society that they didn't understand, and therefore put in their peacekeepers and NATO soldiers instead in Kosovo. They did not even understand what had been developed by the Kosovo Albanians that we worked with, because we were deeply impressed with what they did as a way to liberate their country. The West didn't understand it. They don't understand nonviolence. They don't understand the power of it. Now, we've had the time since Gandhi to learn it, but obviously they didn't. It takes sometimes for certain people to learn certain things. I have given you now 10 examples of where nonviolence works. Much better than any war I can point to in recent times that has lived up to its own goals, satisfied and made life better for the people in which it was practiced. And the biggest of them all, I've said it before in this place and I want to do it again for those who haven't heard it before, the biggest of all and most important of all is that the Cold War structure ended basically thanks to nonviolence. We could not necessarily be sitting in this room, any of us, if that had led to the Third World War, which it would have according to all theories. The bloc system of NATO and the Warsaw Pact was dissolved, unfortunately not NATO, which should have been dissolved, but at least the Soviet Union, the authoritarian regime, and the Warsaw Pact disappeared thanks to nonviolence. The wall disappeared. Berlin was united. Germany was united. Europe got a new chance. Gorbachev was a formidable helper in this process, and nobody takes this man serious today. He's one of the greatest statesmen in modern times. For God's sake, show respect to this man before it's too late, and the others. So the record is good. I'm an optimist in that sense. There are so many good examples of how to help solve conflicts that there's no reason to be depressed. We just need to, adjust a little bit and push the idea of a war out of our agenda and our ways of thinking. That'll take a little time. But it's not impossible at all. We see brilliant examples of people themselves changing societies for the better. Non-violently, no weapons in hand. Milosevic did not fall after 10 years of diplomatic isolation. He did not fall after 10 years of economic sanctions. He did not fall after 89 days of bombings. He fell when 200,000 to 300,000 citizens of Serbia went up and said, it's enough, slow. That's what we should learn from. Tons of good examples. And that's the final thing I think I should say, thinking of the time. That we need to think constructively. When you only think critically, when you only think anti-war or anti-the US or anti-this and that, you will not change the world. If you do that, plus come up with ideas on how it can be done, and if you use modern history's experience, then you, one, will be optimistic, two, you will work pro something. You will work for peace and not just against something. People who work for something and not just against something are more happy people. And their commitment to a cause and their ability to work hard for it over a long time or maybe a whole life is better when they work for something positive than when they work against something they don't like or hate. People who worked against something they have hated become hateful people. People who work for some better society or for peace, they tend to become rather peaceful and happy people, although they do not see the change as fast as they would have liked to see when they were younger, including myself. But I refuse to believe that we can change the world by just talking about what is wrong with it. We do not help the patient if we just tell him that he had been smoking, he should be living in a different way or eating differently. He has done it, the problem is there. Now the question is, can we make a better future possible? And therefore peace work is a matter of scientific methods, knowledge, not only information, but knowledge. Somehow wisdom, such wisdom that Kofi Annan has. And it's an art. You cannot make peace if you cannot have a sense of art. What is art? Art is creativity, intuition. It's spiritual work. It's the envisioning of a better future. You cannot help people out of conflicts if you cannot help them see and develop it through dialogue and brainstorms and whatever have you, a better future together. Or a better future after civilized divorce or confederation solution or something. So my message tonight is there's no limits to what can be done positively with a little creativity, with a little stamina, with a little money, we are going to change this over time. Human civilization can change and will change. One day the nuclear weapons will be gone too, because the majority of the world's countries have decided not to acquire nuclear weapons, and that's a good story. The bad story is that there is an empire that is on its way down. And it may become more and more aggressive, more and more itchy, more and more unpleasant for the rest of the world. So put it into your prayers tonight and all other nights. The United States as an empire will know how to go down with grace, with elegance, and become a country, a republic, one among many, because it's a lovely country with a lot of resources and a lot of things to give to the rest of the world, but its empire must go. And that empire will go together with NATO, which is part of the empire. The world will be a much better place. So if you want NATO to go, devise ideas of how you convert the competence, the people, the intelligence, the technology of NATO to something meaningful, peaceful. I would like to see NATO, all the weapons taken away from it, including of course the nuclear weapons, and use the technology, the communication apparatus, the command structure and all that to be the world's and history's largest and most efficient humanitarian organization, to bring in things, go in where there's earthquakes, whatever. These people do not want to work. They are unfortunately sitting in an organization in which they think they preserve peace by having nuclear weapons. Now we can, perhaps through dialogue with them, change that a little bit so they can become a new kind of organization to the benefit of humanity. And there are lots the Americans still can give the world without being an empire. Let others in. Let others thrive. Let's have unity in diversity, not unity in uniformity. We want a globalized world in which everybody does not think the same way, do not have the same economy, do not have the same laws, do not have the same foreign policy. Let the European Union diversify. Let us work in coalitions instead of having one uniform foreign policy that never works, run by, well, people like Sarkozy and others. You know, there's no limits to what we can do to create a better world. Go out and do it. I've never understood the question, oh, it's so difficult to change the world. What will work? I don't think I can find out anything I can do. There's almost nothing you cannot do that would not be helpful. We just have to let a little bit of the present militarist civilization go. And I think it will go within 20 years. So in other words, the future is bright. Peace can be made by peaceful means. There are good examples of it in a number of countries. And not everybody is anymore following the militarist way or the interventionist way. The opposition is rising. So thank you very much for your attention. I'll try to be constructive.